It was my own stepsister, sitting in my kitchen, wearing my robe, while my husband said I had to accept the new arrangement or leave with nothing. I smiled and told them I'd be gone in 72 hours. They had no idea the house, the cars, and his entire lifestyle all belonged to my little hobby. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into the story. My name is Heather. I am 34 years old, and 2 weeks ago, my life as I knew it ended in a kitchen in Austin, Texas. I had just driven home from the airport, exhausted but triumphant. I had spent 3 days in Chicago closing the biggest deal of my career, securing a contract that would put my company, Greenleaf Innovations, on the national map. All I wanted was to kick off my heels, pour a glass of Chardonnay, and share the good news with my husband, Richard. But when I pulled into the driveway of our sprawling Spanish-style villa, the first thing I noticed wasn't the comfort of home. It was the cars. Next to Richard's gleaming black Mercedes sedan, a car I knew he polished more often than he touched me lately, sat a white convertible. A BMW Z4. It was parked aggressively, at a crooked angle, taking up 2 spaces. It looked like a teenager's car, loud and arrogant. I frowned, grabbing my carry-on. I walked to the front door, and, before I even turned the key, the smell hit me. It was a cloying, sweet vanilla perfume. Cheap, overpowering, and distinctly not mine. My stomach tightened. I opened the door, and the house was silent, but it was a heavy, occupied silence. I walked down the hallway, the sound of my heels clicking on the travertine floors echoing slightly. I turned the corner into the kitchen, and I froze. It was like walking onto a movie set where someone else had been cast to play my life. Richard was sitting at the head of the granite island, reading the Wall Street Journal on his tablet, a mug of coffee in hand. Standing at the stove, humming a tune I didn't recognize, was a woman. She turned around as I entered, flipping a pancake with a casual familiarity that made my blood run cold. It was Tiffany, my stepsister, and she was wearing my robe, the silk, hand-painted kimono I had bought in Kyoto on our honeymoon. "Oh," Tiffany said, her voice devoid of surprise. She smirked, leaning back against the counter. "You're back early." Richard didn't jump. He didn't look guilty. He slowly lowered his tablet, took a sip of coffee, and looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance, as if I were a door-to-door salesperson interrupting his breakfast. "Heather," he said, his voice smooth and deep, the voice that used to make my knees weak, but now sounded like gravel. "We need to talk." "What is she doing here, Richard?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. "And why is she wearing my clothes?" Tiffany giggled. A high, scratching sound. "It's comfy. Besides, we're family, right?" Richard stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. He walked around the island, not to hug me, but to stand beside Tiffany. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a possessive, intimate gesture that shattered my heart into a million jagged pieces right there on the kitchen floor. "Tiffany is moving in," Richard stated calmly. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm proposing a new arrangement," he continued, as if he were discussing a merger at his investment firm. "A civilized one. Tiffany and we have a connection. A spark that you and I lost years ago. She understands my ambition. She understands my needs." "Your needs?" I repeated, looking from him to Tiffany, who was now inspecting her manicured nails, looking bored. "Precisely," Richard said. "So, here are your options. You can accept the situation. You can stay here, in the guest wing. We can coexist. You can continue with your little eco-boxes hobby, and we maintain the image of a marriage for social appearances. Or," he paused for dramatic effect, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Or you can leave. But if you leave, Heather, you leave with what you came into this marriage with. Which, as per our ironclad prenup, and considering your lack of financial contribution to this household over the last 5 years, is essentially nothing." Nothing. The word hung in the air. He thought I had nothing. He thought the house, the cars, the country club membership, the life we lived, he thought it was all his because he was the big, bad investment banker, and I was just the wife with a small business. I looked at Tiffany. She was beaming now, a predator looking at a wounded gazelle. "Don't be difficult, Heather," she said. "Richard needs a woman who actually supports him, not someone who smells like recycled cardboard." A fire ignited in my chest. It wasn't rage. It was something colder, something clearer. I looked at the granite countertops I had paid for. I looked at the high-end appliances I had selected. I looked at the man I had loved for 10 years, standing there, betting everything on my weakness. He expected tears. He expected screaming. He expected me to beg to stay in my own home. Instead, I felt the corners of my mouth twitch upwards. "Okay," I said softly. Richard blinked, confused. "Okay. You've made your position clear," I said, my voice steady, sharp as a diamond cutter. "I'm not interested in a crowd, Richard. I'll be out in 72 hours. I turned around, gripping the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles turned white. 72 hours? Richard called after me, a hint of mockery returning to his voice. "Good. Leave the keys on the counter when you go. And try not to scratch the floors with your luggage." I didn't look back. I walked up the stairs, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. They thought they had won. They thought they were the kings of the castle. They had absolutely no idea that the castle, the moat, and the very ground they stood on belonged to the woman they just evicted. As I reached the landing, I pulled out my phone. My hand wasn't shaking. I unlocked the screen and dialed a number I had saved for emergencies, a number I prayed I'd never have to use. "Patricia," I whispered when the line clicked open. "It's time. Execute the plan."
The moment I turned my back on them in that kitchen, I didn't just walk away from my marriage. I walked into a war. And unlike Richard, I didn't fight with ego. I fought with receipts. If you are listening to this and you have ever felt the sting of betrayal, if you want to see exactly how I turned the tables on the two people who tried to destroy me, please do me a huge favor. Like this video and comment the number 1 down below. Commenting 1 tells me that you are with me, that you are part of my squad, and that you are ready to hear how I took my life back. Your support means everything to me. Go ahead, comment 1, and let me tell you how this all began. To understand why Tiffany stood in my kitchen with that triumphant smirk, you have to go back. You have to understand that this wasn't just about stealing a husband. This was a heist that had been in the planning stages for 20 years. My life was painted in bright, vibrant colors until I was 8 years old. My mother was an artist, a gentle soul who smelled of turpentine and lavender. She taught me that beauty was in the details, in the things most people overlooked. But then, ovarian cancer swept through our home like a hurricane, and within 6 months, the colors faded to gray. She was gone. My father, Thomas, was a good man, but he was weak. He couldn't handle the silence of a grieving house. 2 years after Mom died, he brought Linda home. And with Linda came Tiffany. Tiffany was a year younger than me, a blonde, blue-eyed doll with a heart made of cold stone. From the moment they moved in, the dynamic was set. Linda was the loud, demanding matriarch who believed her daughter was a princess in waiting. My father, desperate to keep the peace and terrified of being alone again, folded like a cheap card table. "Heather, be the bigger person," he would say. "Heather, share your toys. Heather, she's your sister now." But she wasn't my sister. She was my tormentor. The pattern was established early. If I had a doll, Tiffany wanted it. If I got it, she broke it. But the moment I confronted her, the waterworks would start. She could cry on command, big, fat tears that rolled down her cheeks while she looked at my father with wide, innocent eyes. "I didn't mean to," she would wail. "Heather is being mean to me." And I would be the one sent to my room. The incident that seared this into my soul happened when I was 12. I had spent months working on an art project for the state junior competition. It was a mixed-media portrait of my mother, made from dried flowers and watercolor. It was the first time I had felt connected to her since she died. I poured my grief and my love into that canvas. The night before the submission, I left it drying on the dining room table. I woke up to a scream. I ran downstairs to find Tiffany standing over my project. A pitcher of grape Kool-Aid lay overturned on the table. Purple liquid soaked the dried flowers, bleeding into the watercolor, turning my mother's face into a bruised, unrecognizable mess. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the ruin of my hard work. It was an accident. Tiffany screamed before I could even speak. She looked at Linda, who had rushed in. I was just trying to look at it because it was so pretty, and I slipped. Linda immediately pulled Tiffany into a hug. "Shoo, it's okay, baby. It's just a painting. Just a painting." My father stood there, looking at the purple mess, then at me. I waited for him to yell. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to see the smirk that flashed across Tiffany's face buried in Linda's shoulder. "Heather," my dad sighed, rubbing his temples. "You really shouldn't have left it out in a common area. You know how clumsy Tiffany can be." That was the moment I learned the most important lesson of my life: justice isn't given. It has to be taken. And silence is the only shield you have when you are surrounded by people who refuse to hear you. I stopped arguing. I stopped crying. I started locking my door. I started hiding my achievements. When I got straight A's, I tucked the report card in my drawer. When I won a local essay contest, I didn't tell a soul. I realized that anything I loved, Tiffany would try to destroy, and Linda would hand her the hammer, and my father would look away. By the time I left for college, I had built a fortress around myself. I was independent, fierce, and incredibly guarded. I thought I had escaped them. I thought I was free. Then I met Richard. I was a junior at UT Austin, studying business and environmental science. He was a senior, a scholarship kid from a rough neighborhood in Houston who wore scuffed shoes but had a smile that could light up a stadium. He was hungry for success, driven, and seemed to understand what it meant to build something from nothing. I fell for him hard. He didn't know about the inheritance my mother had left me, a small trust fund I was saving for a down payment on a future life. He just saw Heather, the girl in the library who shared his notes. When I started my company, Greenleaf, in my dorm room, Richard was the one who helped me carry the heavy boxes of prototypes. We sat on the floor, eating cheap pizza, dreaming of the future. "We're going to take over the world, Heather," he told me, kissing my forehead. "You and me. Power couple." I believed him. I believed I had finally found someone who was on my team. Someone who wouldn't pour Kool-Aid on my dreams. I was so wrong. I didn't see that Richard had a hole inside him, a void of insecurity that no amount of love could fill. I didn't see that he didn't love me. He loved the way I looked at him. He loved having a cheerleader. And I certainly didn't anticipate that the insecure boy from Houston would grow up to be a man who craved validation so desperately that he would seek it in the arms of the one person who knew exactly how to push my buttons. But back then, I was in love. And love, as they say, makes you blind to the red flags, even when they are waving right in your face. The early years of our marriage were a blur of grinding hard work. While Richard climbed the ladder at a mid-tier investment firm, putting in 80-hour weeks to prove he belonged among the country club set, I was building Greenleaf from the ground up.
My business wasn't sexy. It wasn't a fashion line or a tech app. I designed and manufactured biodegradable packaging for the medical and food industries. Think compostable sterile wraps for surgical tools and plant-based containers for restaurant chains. It was unglamorous, technical, and incredibly lucrative. But I hid the scale of it. This was a deliberate choice, rooted in my childhood trauma with Tiffany. I had learned that shining too bright attracted predators. So, to Richard, Greenleaf was my little business. I let him see the struggles, the late nights, the supply chain issues, but I downplayed the victories. When I landed my first six-figure contract with a hospital network, I took Richard out to dinner. "How did it go?" he asked, swirling his red wine, his eyes scanning the room to see who else was dining at the steakhouse. "Good," I said, smiling. "We got the account. It'll help cover the overhead for the next few months." "That's great, babe," he said dismissively, patting my hand. "Every little bit helps." Speaking of accounts, I just moved a $5 million portfolio for the Henderson family today. Now that is a win. "That's amazing, Richard," I said, and I meant it. I was proud of him. But a small voice in my head warned me not to correct him, not to tell him that my overhead coverage was actually a net profit larger than his annual bonus. Richard's ego was fragile. He needed to be the provider. He needed to be the big man. He had grown up with nothing, and now that he was wearing Italian suits, he needed to feel like he was the one rescuing me from mediocrity. So I let him. I set up a complex financial structure. I paid myself a modest salary that went into our joint checking account, enough to buy groceries, pay for my own clothes, and contribute to vacations. But the bulk of Greenleaf's profits stayed in the company or went into a diversified portfolio of assets held by an LLC that didn't carry my name directly. When we bought our house, the beautiful Spanish villa in the hills, Richard was stressing about the mortgage rates. "I don't know if we should stretch this far, Heather," he said, looking at the listing. "It's $3 million. The monthly payments will be tight." "I have some savings from Mom's trust," I lied smoothly. "And the business had a decent quarter. Why don't we do this? I'll handle the down payment and the mortgage through my business account as a tax write-off for a home office deduction. You handle the utilities, the club memberships, and the lifestyle stuff. That way, you're the head of the household, and I'm just handling the boring back-end paperwork." Richard puffed out his chest. "Well, if you handle the paperwork, but I'm paying the bills, got it? I want my name on the mailbox." "Of course, honey," I said. I bought the house through Greenleaf Holdings. The deed was in the company's name. Richard never bothered to read the fine print at the closing because he was too busy picking out which golf course he would join. He transferred a set amount to the joint account every month for bills, thinking he was paying the mortgage. In reality, he was barely covering the property taxes and the pool boy. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Accord to client meetings. I shopped at Target for casual clothes. I let Richard buy the new Mercedes for himself. I let him lease the BMW when he wanted a weekend car. I let him believe he was carrying me. It was a safety mechanism. I told myself it was to protect his ego. But deep down, I think I knew. That if he knew I was worth 10 times what he was, he wouldn't love me more. He would resent me. And then, 5 years into our marriage, the phone rang. It was my father. "Heather," he said, his voice heavy with that familiar, guilt-inducing tone. "It's Tiffany. She's in trouble." My stomach dropped. "What happened? Is she hurt?"
No. She lost her job."
"Again?" I sighed, rubbing my temples. Tiffany had bounced through 6 jobs in 4 years. Marketing assistant, event planner, fashion stylist. She was fired from all of them for personality conflicts or simply not showing up. "Dad, she's 32. She needs to figure this out. She's depressed, Heather. Linda is worried sick. Look, Richard is a director now, right? At that big investment firm?" "No," I said immediately.
"Dad, no. Don't ask me that."
"Just an interview," he pleaded. "A receptionist role. Anything. She just needs a leg up. You know how hard it is for her. She doesn't have your focus. Please, honey. For me, for the family peace." I closed my eyes. I should have said no. I should have hung up. But the conditioning of a lifetime is hard to break. I wanted my father's approval. I wanted just once for things to be easy. "I'll ask him," I whispered. That night, over dinner, I brought it up. "My sister needs a job," I said, bracing for Richard's mockery. "Entry level. Maybe a front desk thing." Richard laughed, swirling his wine. "Tiffany? The one who wore a white dress to our rehearsal dinner? You want me to hire her? She's desperate. And it would get my dad off my back." Richard looked thoughtful. He took a bite of steak, chewing slowly. You know, she is presentable. Clients like a pretty face at the front desk. And it would make me look like a benevolent family man, wouldn't it? Helping the poor in-laws. He grinned, a shark-like expression that I mistook for playfulness.
All right. Send her in.
But if she messes up, I'm firing her, and you're dealing with Linda.
Deal, I said.
I thought I was solving a problem. I thought I was being a good daughter and a supportive wife. I didn't realize I had just unlocked the front door and invited the wolf right into the living room. Tiffany started working at Sterling and Moss 2 weeks later. I expected her to quit within a month. I expected her to complain about the hours, the commute, or the coffee machine. Instead, something strange happened. She thrived. Or rather, she thrived in a very specific way. She's actually doing great, Richard told me a month later, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. The partners love her. She remembers everyone's drink orders. She flatters the old guys just enough. She's got charm.
Charm, I repeated, feeling a prickle of unease. Tiffany's charm was usually a weapon. Yeah. And she looks the part. We upgraded her wardrobe a bit. Corporate expense. I looked at Richard. You bought her clothes? Uniform allowance, Heather. Relax. It's standard. The shift was subtle at first. It started with the schedule. Richard began working later. Client dinners, he said. Closing deals. Then came the anecdotes. Tiffany became a recurring character in our evening conversations. Tiffany said the funniest thing today. Tiffany caught a typo in the Henderson report. Tiffany thinks I should upgrade my watch. Notice the pattern? It was always Tiffany. And at family gatherings, the dynamic changed completely. Before, Tiffany would sulk in the corner, jealous of my stability. Now, she sat next to Richard. They had inside jokes. They spoke in office shorthand I didn't understand. Oh, did Tom from accounting ever fix that spreadsheet? Tiffany would giggle, touching Richard's arm. No, he's useless, Richard would laugh, leaning into her touch. Thank God I have you to keep the files straight. I sat across the table, poking at my salad, feeling like a ghost. My father beamed, oblivious. Look at them, he said to me. I told you she just needed a chance. Look how well they get along. You did a good thing, Heather. Did I? The pivotal moment, the moment I knew something was rotting beneath the surface, happened at my father's 70th birthday party. It was a barbecue at our house, my house. I had spent all day prepping, organizing the catering, making sure everything was perfect. Richard and Tiffany arrived together. Carpooling to save gas, Richard said, tossing his keys on the counter. They were both laughing, flushed, smelling of the same air conditioning. Tiffany was wearing a sundress that was a little too short, a little too tight. She walked into my kitchen, grabbed a beer, and leaned against the counter exactly where I was chopping vegetables. Great party, sis, she said, popping a cherry tomato into her mouth. Although, Richard says you're stressing too much. You should learn to relax. Have a drink. Richard discusses my stress levels with you? I asked, the knife pausing in my hand. We talk about everything, she said with a shrug. He needs someone to vent to. You're always so busy with your boxes. She said boxes with such disdain, echoing Richard's exact tone. Halfway through the party, I realized Richard was missing. So was Tiffany. I searched the backyard. I checked the living room. Finally, I went out to the garage. The side door was slightly ajar. I heard whispering. She doesn't suspect anything. She's clueless. That was Tiffany's voice. She's just focused on her little world. Don't worry about her. That was Richard. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pushed the door open. They were standing by Richard's Mercedes. Not kissing. Not embracing. Just standing close. Too close. The intimacy was in the air, thick and humid. They jumped apart when they saw me. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Jesus, Heather." Richard snapped, his face flushing red. "Don't sneak up on people. We were just looking at the scratch on the bumper. Tiffany thinks she might have dinged it with her purse." "In the dark?" I asked. "With the lights off?" "It's not dark," Tiffany said quickly, brushing her hair back. Her lipstick was slightly smudged at the corner of her mouth. "We were just coming back inside." "God, why are you so paranoid?" I looked at Richard. I waited for him to reassure me. I waited for him to come to my side. Instead, he rolled his eyes. "Don't start a scene, Heather. It's your dad's birthday. Stop being so insecure. It's unattractive." He walked past me, back into the party. Tiffany followed him, shooting me a look that wasn't fear. It was pity. I stood alone in the garage, the smell of gasoline and expensive cologne filling my nose. I knew. Deep down, I knew. But I didn't have proof. And in my world, the world of business contracts and legal definitions, knowing isn't enough. You need evidence. That night, as I cleaned up the party trash alone while Richard slept off the beers, I made a decision. I stopped crying. I went into my home office, locked the door, and opened a new folder on my laptop. I named it Project Justice. If they wanted to treat me like a fool, I would play the fool. But I would be the most dangerous fool they had ever met. For the next 3 months, I played the role of the dutiful, oblivious wife perfectly. I cooked dinner. I asked about Richard's day. I smiled when he talked about how indispensable Tiffany was becoming at the office. "She's basically my right hand now," he boasted one evening. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, pouring him more wine. "I'm so glad I could help her." Meanwhile, under the surface, I was digging. I hired a forensic accountant disguised as a consultant for Greenleaf to trace household leaks. But the real breakthrough came from Richard's own arrogance. He was technically savvy with financial software, but lazy with data security. We shared a family cloud account for photos and documents. He thought he was clever by creating a hidden folder nested inside a generic folder labeled Old Tax Returns 2018. He underestimated me. I deal with supply chain logistics for a living. I know how to find things that are hidden. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home, finalizing the details of the biggest event in Greenleaf's history. We were being acquired by a massive medical conglomerate, but I would stay on as CEO. The valuation of my company had just been certified. $23 million. I was staring at the email from my CFO, Sarah, tears of joy pricking my eyes. $23 million. My little hobby. My boxes. I was wealthy beyond Richard's wildest dreams. I wanted to celebrate. I instinctively reached for my phone to call my husband. Then I stopped. Instead, I opened the shared cloud drive on my laptop. I had been running a script to monitor changes, and it had pinged a new upload in the tax folder. I clicked through the subfolders. Taxes greater than 2018 receipts miscellaneous. And there it was. Not a receipt. A photo. It was taken in a hotel mirror. The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago, when Richard said he was at a conference in Dallas. In the photo, Richard was in his boxers, holding a glass of champagne. And Tiffany. Tiffany was wearing one of his dress shirts, unbuttoned, laughing, her arms wrapped around his neck. The bed behind them was unmade.
The caption on the file metadata read, "Our weekend." I didn't scream. I didn't throw the laptop. I sat there, looking at the image of my husband and my sister. Then I looked at the email in the other tab confirming my $23 million valuation. The contrast was so sharp, it was almost funny. On one screen, my future. On the other, my past rotting away. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Did you see the number?" Sarah shrieked. "We're rich, boss. Champagne is on me." "Sarah," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. "I need you to come over. And bring the corporate lawyer. Not the contract one. The shark. Bring Patricia."
What? Why?
"Is something wrong with the deal?" "The deal is fine," I said. "But I'm about to liquidate a different kind of asset. And I need to make sure the hazardous waste disposal is handled legally." "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "Is it Richard?" "It's Richard. And Tiffany. I have proof. I'm on my way." That afternoon, while Richard was at work closing deals, probably with Tiffany under his desk, I sat in my living room with Patricia Vance. Patricia was a legend in Austin. She wore Chanel suits and ate cheating husbands for breakfast. She looked at the photo. Then she looked at the financial records I had compiled of Richard's spending, the jewelry bought with our joint funds, the dinners, the hotel rooms. "Textbook," Patricia said, snapping her folder shut. "He's spending marital assets on a paramour. In Texas, that's a big no-no. It's called fraud on the community. We can claw all of that back." "I don't care about the jewelry," I said. "I want them out. I want them gone. And I want him to know exactly what he threw away." "We can file for divorce immediately," Patricia said. "Freezing orders, the works." "No," I said. "Not yet. I want him to feel safe. I want him to think he's winning. He's been asking me to sign a document lately. Something about updating our asset list for tax purposes." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Let me see it." I handed her the paper Richard had left on my desk a few days ago. It was a shady post-nuptial agreement disguised as a tax form. Essentially, it waived my rights to his future earnings in exchange for me keeping my small business liabilities separate. He thought Greenleaf was a liability. He was trying to protect his imaginary millions from my debt. Patricia started laughing. A dry, cackling sound. "Oh, this idiot. He's trying to cut you loose from his fortune because he thinks you're dead weight. If you sign this, and Greenleaf is defined as your separate property, he waives any claim to the appreciation of your company. So, if I sign it, you keep the whole $23 million. Every cent. And he keeps his debt and his 401k. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had worn in months. "I'll sign it tonight," I said. "I'll play the submissive wife one last time. I'll let him think he's outsmarting me. And then?" Patricia asked. "And then," I said, looking at the photo of Tiffany again, "I wait for him to make his move. He's planning something. I can feel it. He wants to move her in. He thinks I'm weak enough to accept it. 72 hours, I whispered to myself. I'll give him 72 hours to hang himself." That evening, Richard came home in a particularly good mood. He was whistling. He even brought flowers, grocery store carnations, cheap and thoughtless, but a gesture nonetheless. "Hey babe," he said, pecking me on the cheek. "How was your day? Still playing with your boxes?" "Something like that," I said, taking the flowers. "I actually had a productive day. I looked over that document you gave me. The tax thing." Richard's eyes lit up. He stopped loosening his tie. "Oh?
And?
I think you're right," I said, infusing my voice with a tremble of uncertainty. "My business is risky. The market is volatile. I don't want to drag you down if I go under. It's better if we keep things separate. You protect your investments, I'll handle my mess." Richard tried to hide his excitement, but I saw his hands shake slightly. "I think that's very mature of you, Heather. It's for your protection, too." "Really?" He pulled the document out of his briefcase. He had it ready.
Of course he did.
I sat at the kitchen table. He handed me a pen. "Just sign right there," he said, pointing to the line. My pen hovered over the paper. In his mind, I was signing away my claim to his precious investment banker salary. In reality, I was signing a death warrant for his financial future. I was locking the vault to the Greenleaf fortune and swallowing the key. I signed. Heather Gablehays. Done, I said. Richard snatched the paper away, checking the signature. He let out a breath he had been holding.
Great.
I'll file this tomorrow. You're doing the right thing, honey. He was so happy. He looked like he had just won the lottery. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. So, he said, pouring himself a scotch. Since we're clearing the air and making new starts, I wanted to talk to you about something. Here it comes. What is it?
Tiffany, he said.
She's having a hard time. Her roommate is kicking her out. Linda is driving her crazy. She needs a place to stay for a while. My heart hammered, but I kept my face neutral. Here, Richard, we have a guest room, but not just a place to stay, Richard interrupted. I was thinking she helps me so much with work. It makes sense for her to be closer. And frankly, Heather, I think having her here would be good for us. Good for us?
Yes.
You're always so tired, so stressed with your business. Tiffany brings energy. She's fun. She could help you around the house. Cook, clean. It would be like a modernized family arrangement. He was testing the waters. He wasn't fully admitting the affair yet, but he was laying the groundwork for a harem. He wanted his wife to pay the bills and keep up appearances, and his mistress under the same roof to amuse him. He thought I was desperate enough to agree. I need to think about it. I stammered, playing the part. Don't take too long, Richard said, his voice hardening just a fraction. I already told her she could bring some boxes over this weekend. He walked away, heading to his study to call her. To tell her the old ball and chain was bending to his will. I sat in the kitchen, the signed post-nup agreement still on the table, where he'd left a copy. I looked at my phone. I had a text from Sarah. Sarah, the wire transfer is scheduled. The trust is funded. By Friday, you will be liquid and untouchable. Friday. That was 3 days away.
I looked at the calendar. Today was Tuesday. I needed to survive 3 more days. I needed to let them think they had won until the ink was dry and the money was moved. Okay, Richard, I whispered to the empty room. You want Tiffany here? Bring her. Let's gather all the rats in one ship before I sink it. The next 2 days were a psychological torture test. Tiffany didn't wait for the weekend. She started moving things in on Wednesday. Little things. A box of shoes. Her favorite coffee creamer. A framed photo of her and my father, which she placed prominently on the mantelpiece, pushing my wedding photo to the side. Just making it cozy, she chirped when I stared at it. She treated me like a guest in my own home. She criticized the curtains. A bit dated, don't you think? We should go for something lighter. Richard likes modern. Richard likes. She was marking her territory. Peed on every corner of my life. Thursday night, I came home late from the office. I had spent the day with Patricia, finalizing the cease and desist orders and the divorce petition. Everything was drafted. We were just waiting for the signal. When I walked in, I heard laughter from the dining room. I found Richard and Tiffany sitting at the table, eating takeout sushi. They hadn't set a place for me. Oh, hey, Richard said, mouth full. We didn't think you'd be home for dinner. You're always working late. It's fine, I said. I'm not hungry. Tiffany was just telling me about this trip to Cabo she wants to plan, Richard said. For the team. I think you should come, Heather. It would be good for you to get some sun. You look pale. Cabo? I asked. On the corporate card? Richard's eyes narrowed. It's a business retreat. Don't start with the accounting questions. Tiffany smirked. Yeah, Heather. Live a little. Richard works so hard, he deserves a break. You should be grateful he provides all this. She gestured around the room. Around my room. Provides, I repeated, fighting the urge to laugh hysterically. Right. Richard provides. I walked upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom. But when I opened the closet, I froze. My clothes had been pushed to one side. Occupying the prime real estate in the center were Tiffany's clothes. Cheap, flashy dresses, neon tops, plastic hangers. She had moved into my master closet. This was the violation that almost broke me. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the sex. It was the invasion of my sanctuary. I reached out and touched one of her polyester blouses. I wanted to rip it down. I wanted to set it on fire. But then I remembered the number. $23 million. I remembered the document Richard had signed. I took a deep breath. I pulled my hand back. Not yet, I told myself. Tomorrow. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow, the wire transfer would clear. Tomorrow, the 72-hour clock Richard had unknowingly started would begin to tick down to my deadline, not his. I packed a small bag. Just essentials. My jewelry, the pieces I bought myself, my passport, the hard drive with my business backups. I hid the bag in the back of my car. I went back downstairs. I'm going to bed, I announced. In the guest room, right? Richard said, not looking up from his phone. Tiffany and I have some late-night work to do on the Henderson file. We need the space. He was kicking me out of my own bed. In my own house. For my stepsister. It was so blatant, so grotesque, that it transcended anger. It became pure, crystallized hatred. Sure, I said. The guest room is fine. I slept in the guest room. I listened to the murmurs and giggles coming from the master suite down the hall. I stared at the ceiling, counting sheep. But the sheep turned into lawyers, and the lawyers turned into wolves, and the wolves were eating Richard alive. I slept like a baby. Friday morning. The day of the confrontation. The day the story began. I woke up early, dressed in my sharpest power suit, and drove to the office. I needed to be away when the final pieces fell into place. At 10 a.m., Sarah walked into my office with a bottle of Dom Perignon. It's done, she said, grinning. The funds are secured in the trust. The LLC ownership transfer is recorded. Greenleaf is legally untouchable. And that post-nup Richard signed? We filed it at the courthouse at 8 a.m. sharp. I let out a long, shuddering breath. So he has nothing? He has his salary, Sarah shrugged. And half of the joint checking account. Which, as of this morning, contains exactly $4,000. And the house? The house is owned by Greenleaf Holdings. The cars are leased by Greenleaf Logistics. The furniture is listed as corporate staging assets. Sarah paused, her eyes gleaming. Technically, Richard is trespassing on corporate property. Perfect. I checked my phone. I had a text from Richard. Richard, come home early. We need to settle the living arrangement's final talk. He was going to give me the ultimatum. He was going to deliver the new arrangement speech. I picked up the phone and called Patricia. It's a go, I said. Meet me there in an hour. Bring the papers. And bring a process server. I want it official. I'll be there with bells on, Patricia said. I drove home. The drive felt different this time. The dread was gone. The fear was gone. I felt light. I felt powerful. I pulled into the driveway. I saw the white convertible. I saw the Mercedes. I walked to the door. I smelled the perfume. I walked into the kitchen. And there they were. The scene I described to you at the beginning. Tiffany in my robe. Richard with his coffee. The smugness. The audacity. "You're home early," he said. I listened to his speech. I listened to him offer me this civilized arrangement. I listened to him threaten me with the prenup. I listened to Tiffany call my life a little hobby. I absorbed it all. Every insult was fuel. Every smirk was a receipt I was filing away for immediate reimbursement. "I'll be out in 72 hours, I had told them. And I meant it. But I wouldn't be leaving the house. I would be leaving them in the ruins of their own arrogance. I walked up the stairs, packed the last of my things into the suitcase I had prepared, and waited. I looked out the window. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. Patricia stepped out. She looked like an executioner in Prada. Beside her was a large man holding a thick manila envelope. My cavalry had arrived. I checked my watch. 72 hours? No. Their time was up now. I walked back downstairs. Richard and Tiffany were still in the kitchen, laughing. They were probably planning how to redecorate. "Heading out already?" Richard asked, not looking up. "Not quite," I said. "There's just one more thing we need to discuss." "Make it quick, Heather. We have plans."
"Oh, I know," I said, opening the front door. "But I think your plans just got canceled." Patricia walked in. The air in the room changed instantly. Richard knew who she was. Everyone in Austin with money knew who Patricia Vance was. "Richard Hayes," the process server asked, stepping forward. Richard stood up, confusion clouding his face. "Yes, you've been served." The man thrust the envelope into Richard's chest. "What is this?" Richard stammered, looking at me. "Heather, what is this?" "It's the real arrangement, Richard," I said, my voice cold and hard. "And I think you're going to hate it." Before I tell you about the look on Richard's face when Patricia handed him those papers, we need to rewind. Because to truly understand the satisfaction of the execution, you have to witness the crime. I told them I would be out in 72 hours. And for those 3 days, I became a ghost in my own home, silently gathering the ammunition I would need to bury them. It started on Wednesday, the first day of my countdown. I had stayed home from the office, ostensibly to pack. In reality, I was there to document. I set up my phone to record audio in the kitchen and the living room. I needed proof of their intent. I needed to show the court and myself that this wasn't just a marriage falling apart. This was a hostile takeover. By noon, Tiffany was in full swing. She wasn't just moving in, she was erasing me. I was in the kitchen, carefully wrapping my grandmother's crystal glasses, one of the few things I was actually taking, when Tiffany walked in with a contractor. A man I didn't recognize. "So, this wall," Tiffany said, waving a manicured hand at the partition between the kitchen and the dining room. "It makes the space feel so closed in. I want it gone. Open concept. And the cabinets? This cherry wood is so 1990s. I want everything white. High gloss." The contractor nodded, taking notes. "It's a load-bearing wall, ma'am. That's a big job." "Richard says money isn't an issue," Tiffany chirped. "Just draw it up." She turned and saw me standing there. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked annoyed, like I was a stain on the rug she hadn't gotten around to cleaning yet. "Oh, Heather," she said. "Could you move your boxes? Stan needs to measure the floor square footage." "You're remodeling?" I asked, my voice steady. "I haven't even moved out yet." "Well, we want to get a head start," she said, stepping closer. She smelled of Richard's cologne, a scent that used to make me feel safe and now made me nauseous. "Richard and I want a fresh start. No offense, but the energy in this house is very heavy, very stagnant. We want to brighten it up, make it a place for people who are actually alive."
Alive.
As if I were dead. I moved my box. "Do whatever you want, Tiffany. It's all yours." Later that afternoon, I went into my home office, the sanctuary where I had built Greenleaf from a terrifying idea into a $23 million empire. I expected to find it quiet. Instead, I found Richard. He was standing in the middle of the room, hands on his hips, looking at the built-in bookshelves filled with my design awards and technical manuals. "What are you doing?" I asked. He jumped slightly, then composed himself. "Just thinking. This room has the best light in the house. It's wasted on storage. It's my office, Richard." "Not for long," he said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "I was thinking this would make a great cigar lounge. Or maybe a home gym. I'm tired of driving to the club." "Yeah, gym. We can rip out these shelves, put the Peloton over there. Maybe a sauna in the corner." He reached out and pulled one of my green leaf prototypes, a biodegradable surgical tray, off the shelf. He looked at it with a sneer. "All this junk," he muttered. "Just cardboard and dreams. You know, Heather, I'm actually doing you a favor." "A favor?"
Yes.
"By letting you go. You've been drowning in this mediocrity for years. Now you can go get a small apartment, maybe find a job that pays a real salary, and stop pretending you're a CEO. You were never cut out for the high life, babe. You're too simple." He tossed the prototype into the trash bin by the desk.
Thud.
That sound. That hollow thud of my life's work hitting the bottom of a metal can. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to scream. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to scream, "That piece of junk you just threw away is patented in 12 countries and generated $3 million last quarter." But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. The wire transfer hadn't cleared. The postnup hadn't been filed. "You're right, Richard," I said, forcing my voice to sound defeated. "I'm simple. I'll clear everything out by Friday. You can have your gym." He patted me on the shoulder as he walked past. "Good girl. Don't forget to patch the holes in the wall where you hung those little certificates. I don't want to pay a painter." I waited until he was gone. Then I reached into the trash can and retrieved the prototype. I dusted it off and placed it gently in my suitcase. "You have no idea," I whispered to the empty room. "You have absolutely no idea." That night, as I lay in the guest bed, I checked my bank app. The balance in the joint account was shrinking by the hour. Richard had taken Tiffany to Jeffrey's for dinner, a steakhouse where the average plate is $80. The transaction notification popped up on my phone. $485, Jeffrey's of Austin. I smiled in the dark. "Eat up, Richard. Enjoy the Wagyu. Because starting Friday, you'll be lucky if you can afford a drive-through burger." Thursday, day 2. The atmosphere in the house had shifted from tense to celebratory. They were acting like they had already won the lottery. I spent the morning packing my personal clothes. I was meticulous. I left nothing that they could use or sell. My designer handbags bought with my dividends, my shoes, my winter coats. Around 11 a.m., I heard the piano. It was coming from the living room. A slow, halting melody. Claire de Lune. It was the song Richard had played for me on our first anniversary. He wasn't a musician, but he had learned that one song just to surprise me. Back then, it had made me cry. I walked downstairs, drawn by the ghost of the man I used to love. Richard was sitting at the baby grand, fumbling through the keys. Tiffany was sitting on top of the piano, literally sitting on the Steinway I had restored, swinging her legs and sipping a mimosa. "You're getting better, baby," she squealed. "It sounds so fancy." Richard looked up and saw me. He stopped playing.
For a split second, I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Shame? Regret? It was there, fleeting and faint. He looked at me, really looked at me, standing there in my jeans and t-shirt, holding a box of books. "Heather," he said, his voice softer than it had been in months. "That used to be my favorite song," I said quietly. Tiffany scoffed. "Used to be? God, you're so dramatic." "It's just a song." Richard's face hardened again. The mask slipped back into place. He looked from me to Tiffany, from the tired wife carrying boxes to the young, exciting mistress sipping champagne. He made his choice. Again. "It's just a song, Heather," he repeated coldly. "Don't read into it. By the way, I spoke to my broker this morning. Oh, yeah. I'm thinking about liquidating some assets once the divorce is final. I might sell this piano. It takes up too much space. And frankly, looking at it just reminds me of bad investments. He called our marriage a bad investment. And, he continued, I was thinking about your little company. Greenleaf. My heart stopped. What about it? Since you signed that post-nup separating our assets, I assume you're keeping it? Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice even. That was the agreement. Good, Richard laughed. Because I was worried the court might force me to take half of its debt. I don't want that anchor around my neck. You keep your boxes, Heather. I'll keep the real portfolio. He turned back to the keys and started playing a jarring, upbeat jazz tune, drowning out my presence. I walked into the hallway and dialed my father. I needed to hear a sane voice. I needed my dad to tell me that this was wrong, that he was on my side. Dad, I said when he answered. I'm leaving Richard. Oh, Heather, Thomas sighed. He didn't sound surprised. I heard. Linda told me. You heard? Dad, he's kicking me out. He moved Tiffany in. They're living together in my house before I've even left. There was a silence on the line. Then, the betrayal. Heather, honey, listen, my father said, his voice wheedling. Relationships are complicated. Richard called me. He explained things. He said you've been distant. Cold. A man has needs, Heather. He's sleeping with your stepdaughter, Dad. In my house. Tiffany is, she's sensitive, my father said, shifting the pivot. She's finally found someone who takes care of her. Richard is a good provider. Look, don't make this messy. Don't ruin this for your sister. Ruin it for her? I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. She ruined my marriage. You're strong, Heather, he said, delivering the final blow. You've always been the independent one. You can take care of yourself. Tiffany, she needs this. She needs a win. Just let her have this one, okay? Be the bigger person. For me. I felt the phone slip slightly in my sweaty palm. Be the bigger person. The mantra of my childhood. The phrase that meant let Tiffany steal from you and smile about it. I am going to be the bigger person, Dad, I said, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it felt like calm. I'm going to be the biggest person anyone has ever seen. Goodbye. I hung up. I blocked his number. Then I blocked Linda's number. I stood in the hallway, alone. I had no husband. I had no father. I had no sister. But as I looked down at my phone, a notification popped up from my bank. Incoming wire transfer, $5 million, partial liquidation successful. I wasn't alone. I had 5 million soldiers in my bank account, and 18 million more on the way. I wiped my face. No more tears. The time for sadness was over. It was time for war. Thursday night. The last night. The house was quiet. Richard and Tiffany had gone out to celebrate their future, leaving me alone in the tomb of my past life. I couldn't sleep. I got up around 2 a.m. to get a glass of water. As I walked past the master bedroom, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. The light was on. They were back. I was about to turn away, to retreat to my guest room, when I heard Tiffany's voice. It wasn't her usual high-pitched giggle. It was a low, purring sound. God, look at this stuff, Richard. Why did she never wear any of this? I crept closer. Through the crack in the door, I saw them. Tiffany was sitting at my vanity table, the antique mahogany one that had belonged to my grandmother. She was going through my jewelry box. Richard was lying on the bed, my bed, watching her with a lazy, satisfied grin. She has no taste, Richard said. She buys things because she thinks she should, but she doesn't know how to carry them. You, on the other hand. Tiffany held up a pair of diamond earrings. These are nice. Are they real? Probably cubic zirconia, Richard laughed. Knowing Heather, she probably got them on sale at a department store. They were vintage Cartier. They were worth more than his car. But then, Tiffany picked up something else. My breath hitched in my throat. It was a small, gold locket. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't flashy. But inside, it held the only existing photo of my mother holding me the day I was born. It was the single most precious object I owned. I kept it in the velvet back corner of the box, safe. Tiffany popped it open. She squinted at the tiny photo. Who is this? Some old lady and a baby? She laughed. Depressing. Throw it out, Richard yawned. We don't need her clutter. Tiffany snapped the locket shut. But she didn't throw it out. She unclasped the chain and fastened it around her own neck. She turned to the mirror, posing, turning her head side to side. The gold glimmered against her skin. Actually, she murmured, stroking the locket with a possessive finger. I think I'll keep it. It looks better on me anyway. It gives me a classy vibe, don't you think? You make everything look good, babe, Richard said. Come here. She stood up, wearing my mother's memory around her neck like a trophy of war, and walked toward the bed. I stood in the hallway, my nails digging into my palms so hard they drew blood. Everything inside me screamed to kick open that door. To drag her out by her hair. To rip that locket from her throat and scream until the windows shattered. It was a primal, violent urge. But I stopped. If I went in there now, I would be the crazy ex-wife. I would be the hysterical woman they painted me to be. They would call the police. They would win the narrative. I needed them to lose everything. Not just a moment of peace, but their entire future.
I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I steadied them against the doorframe. I hit record. I filmed through the crack. I caught Tiffany wearing the locket. I caught Richard telling her to keep it. I caught the theft on camera. Then I lowered the phone. I backed away, silent as a shadow. Enjoy it, Tiffany, I thought, the ice in my veins turning into absolute zero. Wear it, because that locket is going to be the noose that hangs you. I went back to my room. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, waiting for the sun to rise. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't grieving. I was a sniper, waiting for the target to walk into the crosshairs. Friday morning broke with a brilliant, blinding Texas sun. It was a beautiful day for demolition. I was dressed by 7 a.m. A tailored navy suit, killer heels, and my hair pulled back in a sleek bun. I didn't look like a woman who had been crying. I looked like the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. At 8 a.m., the movers arrived. Richard and Tiffany were in the kitchen, eating bagels. They looked surprised to see a professional crew of 4 men in uniforms marching in. Wow, Richard said, looking at the logo on their shirts, Secure Logistics. You went all out. Moving to a studio apartment doesn't usually require a crew this size. I like to be efficient, I said, checking a clipboard. I directed the men. But I didn't tell them to take the furniture. I didn't tell them to take the TV. Take the files in the office. I commanded. Take the server tower. Take the prototypes. Take the framed patents. What about the couch? Tiffany asked, watching a mover carry out a box labeled IP litigation files. Aren't you taking your old furniture? We don't want it. I'm leaving it, I said breezily. I'm upgrading. You two can keep the hand-me-downs. Tiffany bristled, but Richard laughed. Suit yourself. Saves us money on furnishing the guest rooms. By 9 a.m., my car was packed with the only things that mattered: my business intelligence and my personal documents. The house was still fully furnished. It looked exactly the same, minus me. I walked into the kitchen for the final time. Richard was leaning against a counter, holding an envelope. He looked almost benevolent. The lord of the manor granting a favor to a peasant. "Heather," he said, extending the envelope. "Look, I know this is hard. And despite everything, I don't want to see you on the street. I know your business isn't exactly liquid." He handed me the envelope. I opened it.
It was a personal check.
Written from our joint account. Pay to the order of Heather Gable, $5,000. Memo. Moving expenses / gift. A gift. $5,000. From the money I had mostly contributed. "It's to help you get settled," Richard said, his chest puffing out. "First and last month's rent on a place. Maybe some groceries. Consider it a severance package from the marriage." Tiffany giggled from behind her coffee mug. "That's so generous of you, Richard. You're too nice." I looked at the check. Then I looked at Richard.
"Thank you, Richard," I said.
"This will come in handy." I folded the check and put it in my pocket, not because I needed it, but because it was evidence. Exhibit B, condescension. "Well," Richard clapped his hands. "I guess this is it."
Keys.
I reached into my purse and pulled out my house keys. I placed them gently on the granite counter.
Clink.
"Goodbye, Richard. Goodbye, Tiffany." "Bye, sis." Tiffany waved, her fingers wiggling mockingly. "Don't be a stranger. Give us a call once you find yourself." I turned and walked toward the front door. I grabbed the handle. I paused. The timing had to be perfect. I checked my watch. 9:14 a.m. Patricia said she would be there at 9:15 a.m. I opened the door. And there she was. Patricia Vance, standing on the porch, hand raised to knock. Behind her stood the process server, a large man named Mike who looked like he wrestled bears for fun. And behind them, a tow truck was backing into the driveway, its reverse beep cutting through the morning air.
Beep, beep, beep.
I stepped aside, holding the door open. "Right on time," I said to Patricia. "I hate to be late," she winked. I turned back to the interior of the house. Richard and Tiffany had followed me into the foyer, drawn by the sound of the truck. "What is going on?" Richard demanded, seeing the strangers. "Who are you people?" "Heather, why is there a tow truck in my driveway?" I smiled. A real, genuine, ear-to-ear smile. "I'm not leaving, Richard," I said softly. "But you are." The silence that followed my statement was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a bomb detonates. Richard looked at me, then at Patricia, then at the large man holding the manila envelope. His brain was trying to process the shift in reality, but it was jamming. He was still operating on the Master of the House software, and I had just installed a virus. "What are you talking about?" Richard laughed nervously.
It was a brittle sound.
"You're delusional. Stress has finally cracked you." He stepped forward, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate. "Get these people off my property, Heather.
Now.
Or I'm calling the police." "I think you should call the police," Patricia Vance spoke up. Her voice was like a cello, deep, rich, and commanding. "It might save us the trouble. But first." She nodded to Mike, the process server. Mike stepped forward. He didn't look intimidated by Richard's Italian suit. He looked bored. "Richard Hayes?" Mike asked. "Yes, I'm Richard Hayes." "Who the hell are you? And Tiffany Miller?" Mike looked at the woman cowering slightly behind Richard. "That's me," she squeaked. Mike slapped two thick envelopes into Richard's chest. He had to grab them reflexively to stop them from hitting the floor. "You've been served," Mike said. "Divorce petition for him. Civil lawsuit for alienation of affection and theft for her. And cease and desist orders for both of you regarding the unauthorized occupation of corporate property." Richard stared at the envelopes. He looked like he was holding a venomous snake. "Divorce?" he sputtered. "I know we're getting divorced. I told her to leave. What is this corporate property nonsense?"
He ripped open the top envelope. His eyes scanned the first page. I watched the blood drain from his face. It started at his forehead and washed down to his neck, leaving him a pale, ghostly gray. This. His hands started to shake. This says, eviction? He looked up, eyes wild. You're evicting me? From my house? It's not your house, Richard, I said, leaning against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Read the deed. I pay the mortgage, he shouted, his voice cracking. I transfer the money every month. It's my name on the mail. You transfer money to a holding account, I corrected him gently. And Greenleaf Holdings LLC pays the mortgage. The deed is in the company name. You are, legally speaking, a tenant at will. And as the CEO of the parent company, I am terminating your tenancy. Effective immediately. Tiffany grabbed Richard's arm. What is she talking about, Richard? You said you bought this house. You said it was yours. Richard shoved her off. Shut up, Tiffany. I'm thinking. He turned back to me, desperation creeping into his eyes. This is a trick. A legal loop. My lawyer will shred this. We have a prenup. What's mine is mine. Patricia stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the marble. She opened her leather briefcase and pulled out the document Richard had signed just 3 days ago. The tax document. Ah, yes, Patricia said smoothly. The prenup. And, more importantly, the postnuptial agreement you executed on Tuesday. Let's review, shall we? She held up the paper. In this document, you voluntarily waived all claims to Heather's business assets, past, present, and future, in exchange for protection from her liabilities. You defined Greenleaf Innovations and all its subsidiaries as her sole and separate property. Richard's mouth opened and closed. He remembered. He remembered how happy he was to sign it. Well, Patricia continued, it turns out Greenleaf Holdings, which owns this house, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Greenleaf Innovations. Which means, this house is her sole and separate property. You waived your right to it. In writing. Notarized. Filed. Richard looked like he was going to vomit. And the cars? Patricia pointed out the window. Outside, the tow truck driver was hooking chains onto the bumper of the Mercedes. Richard's Mercedes. The symbol of his success. Hey! Richard screamed, running toward the door. Hey! Don't touch that car. That vehicle is leased by Greenleaf Logistics, Patricia called after him. As you are no longer an employee or authorized officer of the company, your insurance is void. We are repossessing company assets. Richard froze in the doorway. He watched as the car was lifted into the air. Then, he saw the second truck backing up toward the BMW. Tiffany shrieked. A high, piercing sound that shattered the morning calm. My car! Richard, they're taking my car. It's not your car, Tiffany, I said. It's a company fleet vehicle. And since you were never actually hired by Greenleaf, you've been driving a stolen vehicle for 6 months. We could press criminal charges. But I'm feeling generous. I'll just take it back. Tiffany ran out onto the porch, waving her arms. Stop! You can't do this. I have my yoga mat in there. I suggest you get it, Mike the process server grunted. Before they tow it to the impound lot. I walked out onto the porch and stood next to Richard. He was trembling. He looked at the tow trucks, then at the papers in his hand, then at me. The arrogance was gone. The master of the universe persona had evaporated. All that was left was a scared, greedy little man who had gambled everything on the assumption that I was stupid. Why? He whispered, his voice hoarse. Why did you do it like this? Because you brought her here, I said, looking him dead in the eye. You could have left, Richard. You could have asked for a divorce. We could have split things fairly. But you had to bring her into my home. You had to humiliate me. You had to try to erase me. I leaned in close, so only he could hear. You wanted a new arrangement? Here it is. You have nothing. You are nothing. And you have exactly 10 minutes to get off my property before Mike here throws you off. The lawn was becoming a spectacle. Neighbors were peeking through their blinds. The tow truck lights were flashing amber against the stucco walls of the house. Richard was hyperventilating. He was trying to find a loophole, any loophole, in the crumbling architecture of his life. The money, he gasped, turning on me. The joint account. I have savings. I have my salary. You can't touch my salary. Patricia Vance smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Actually, she said, pulling out another spreadsheet. Let's talk about the marital estate. She handed a copy to Richard and one to Tiffany, who was clutching her yoga mat and crying. According to the forensic accounting we completed yesterday, Patricia began, lecturing as if she were in a courtroom. Richard, you have spent approximately $145,000 of marital funds over the last 2 years on non-marital activities. She looked at Tiffany. Hotels. Jewelry. Dinners. Flights. A BMW lease down payment. Tiffany stopped crying and looked down. Under Texas law, Patricia continued, that is considered dissipation of assets. Constructive fraud. Which means, Heather is entitled to be reimbursed for her half of that money from your share of the remaining estate. So? Richard spat. Take it. I still have my 401k. I have the checking account. The joint checking account, Patricia checked her notes, currently has a balance of $4,200. Half of that is yours. So, $2,100. And the 401k? Richard demanded. I have nearly $300,000 in there. Yes, Patricia nodded. However, since you owe Heather reimbursement for the $145,000 you spent on Miss Miller here, plus legal fees, plus the unpaid rent for the unauthorized use of the corporate housing. She did a mock calculation in her head. By my estimate, after we liquidate your 401k to pay back Heather, you will be left with roughly negative $12,000. You actually owe her money, Mr. Hayes. Richard stumbled back as if physically hit. He grabbed the porch railing to steady himself. This is impossible, he wheezed. You're lying. Heather. Heather makes boxes. She makes nickels. I supported her. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It bubbled up from my chest, pure and cleansing. Oh, Richard, I said, pulling out my phone. You really never paid attention, did you? I opened my banking app. I tapped on the Greenleaf Business Valuation Report, the one I had received on Tuesday. I held the screen up to his face. Read the number, Richard. He squinted through his tears of panic. Valuation, $23,500,000. Liquid assets, $18 million. 23 million, he whispered. The words sounded foreign in his mouth.
My little hobby, I said. While you were busy playing big shot with your $100,000 salary and buying cheap jewelry for my sister, I was building an empire. I own the patents on the packaging used in 60% of the hospitals in this state. I just signed a national distribution deal. Tiffany looked at the phone screen. Her eyes went wide, greedy saucers. You have $23 million? She screeched. She turned to Richard, her face twisting into a mask of fury. You said she was broke. You said she was a loser. You said you were the rich one. I didn't know, Richard stammered, staring at me with a look of total horror. It wasn't just the money. It was the realization that he had been living with a giant and treating her like an insect. You had a winning lottery ticket in your pocket, I told him. And you threw it away for that. I gestured to Tiffany. Tiffany looked at Richard with pure disgust. You lied to me. You said you were going to take care of me. You have nothing? You're broke? We can fight this. Richard pleaded, reaching for her. Tiffany, baby, we can get a lawyer. We can. With what money? Tiffany screamed, shoving him away. You can't even afford a lawyer. You can't even afford an Uber right now. She turned to me, her demeanor changing instantly. The tears stopped. The poor sister act returned. Heather, she said, stepping toward me, hands clasped. Heather, look, I didn't know. He lied to me too. He told me you guys were separated. He told me you wanted this. I'm a victim here too. Stop, I said, raising my hand. I walked over to her. I looked at her neck. The necklace, I said softly. Give it to me. Tiffany clutched her throat.
What?
My mother's locket.
The one you stole last night.
The one you said looked better on you. Tiffany paled. How did you? I see everything, Tiffany. Give it to me.
Now.
Or Mike calls the cops and adds grand larceny to the list. Trembling, she unclasped the locket. She dropped it into my hand. It felt warm from her skin, which made me want to sanitize it, but I clutched it tight. Get out, I said to both of them. You have 5 minutes to grab your personal clothes, only what you can carry in your hands, and get off my property. If you take anything else, if you take a single spoon, I will have you arrested. But where will we go? Richard asked, looking at his Mercedes disappearing down the street. I hear the Motel 6 on the interstate has vacancies, I said. And Richard? Here. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the check he had given me earlier. The $5,000 gift. I ripped it in half. Then I ripped it again. I threw the confetti pieces at his feet. I don't need your charity.
Keep it.
You're going to need it for the deposit. The spectacle of their departure was pathetic. Richard and Tiffany ran into the house, scrambling. I stood in the foyer with Mike and Patricia, watching them like a hawk. They didn't pack neatly. They grabbed armfuls of clothes. Richard stuffed his suits into a garbage bag. Tiffany was crying, trying to shove her makeup into her purse, dropping half of it on the floor. They started arguing, loudly. This is your fault, Richard yelled, struggling with a hanger. If you hadn't pushed for the move-in, she wouldn't have snapped. My fault, Tiffany screamed back. You're the one who signed the prenup. You're the idiot who didn't know his wife was a multimillionaire. You're a loser, Richard. A fake. I bought you everything. You bought me with her money. You're a fraud. It was music to my ears. The great romance, the connection Richard claimed they had, evaporated the second the credit card declined. They weren't in love. They were two parasites who had realized the host body was no longer feeding them. As they dragged their garbage bags of clothes out to the driveway, a car pulled up. It was my father. He jumped out of his Buick, looking panicked. Heather, Richard called me. What is happening? He says you're ruining him. I walked down the steps to meet him. I'm not ruining him, Dad. I'm divorcing him. But the house? The cars? He says you're taking everything. I'm keeping what is mine, I said calmly. Just like you taught me, Dad. Remember? Heather, take care of yourself. Heather, handle it. Well, I handled it. My father looked at Tiffany, who was sitting on the curb next to a trash bag, sobbing into her hands. Look at your sister, he shouted, his face red. How can you be so cruel? She has nowhere to go. You have this big house, you have millions, Richard said. Can't you just help them? Give them the guest house. Something. Even now, even after everything, he was still asking me to share my toys with a girl who broke them. No, I said. Heather, she's family. She slept with my husband, Dad. In my bed. And you knew. You took his side. I looked at him with a profound sense of loss, but also relief. The cord was cut. You made your choice, Dad. You chose the daughter, who needs you. Well, congratulations. She needs you now more than ever. Because she's homeless. I turned back to the house. Heather, he called after me. If you do this, don't expect to come to Thanksgiving. Don't expect. I don't expect anything from you anymore, I said without turning around. That's the freedom. I walked up the steps. Patricia was waiting for me. Mike, I said. Lock the door behind them. Mike nodded and stepped forward. Richard was standing by the curb, holding his bag of suits. He looked at me one last time. His eyes were hollow. The reality was settling in. He wasn't just broke, he was humiliated. He was the man who had gold in his hands and turned it into dust. Heather, he croaked. Please. I didn't answer. I just closed the heavy oak door.
Thud.
The sound of the lock clicking into place was the most satisfying sound of my life. I slid down against the door and sat on the floor of the foyer. The house was silent. The perfume smell was still faint in the air, but I knew I could scrub it out. Patricia sat down next to me. She didn't say anything legal. She just handed me a tissue. You okay? She asked. I lost a husband, a sister, and a father in 1 hour, I said, wiping a tear. And you gained $23 million and your life back, Patricia reminded me. Trade of the century, if you ask me. I laughed. It started as a giggle and turned into a sob, and then back into a laugh. Yeah, I said. Good trade. 6 months later.
And so, this story reminds us of one profound truth: strength does not come from the absence of challenges, but from the courage to face them head-on. Heather's journey is a testament to the power of self-worth and resilience. When life tries to diminish you, when others seek to exploit your kindness or underestimate your value, remember that your worth is not defined by their perceptions. You are the architect of your own destiny, capable of rising above betrayal, heartbreak, and loss with grace and determination. This tale also teaches us the importance of preparation and patience. Heather didn't act out of impulse, she acted with purpose, strategy, and clarity. In doing so, she reclaimed her life and proved that victory is sweetest when it's earned through wisdom and perseverance. Let this be a reminder: no matter how dark the storm, you hold the power to rebuild, stronger and brighter than before. What about you? What lessons did this story spark in your heart? Share your thoughts below or simply comment good if this reflection resonated with you. Let's keep the conversation alive and inspire each other to stand tall in the face of challenges.